I first played Metal Slug years ago on a Neo Geo MVS arcade cabinet. It sat between a hunting game and claw machine, but Metal Slug was clearly the main attraction. One small glance at the demo screen and I was immediately hooked. It was a combination of action-packed gameplay, beautifully detailed sprite work, and expressive animations that set this game apart from any other arcade cabinet. This goes without saying, but this all took place inside of a pizzeria. This was a pre-9/11 America, and the arcade business wasn't doing too hot. You see, throughout the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was illegally. Throughout the 1980s, arcades were at the height of their popularity because home systems couldn't compete. That all started to change with the introduction of the 4th generation of consoles. Now there were home systems that could run arcade ports with little to no compromise, although this generation's Miss Pac-Man still looked a bit off. Arcade developers tried to one-up the competition by getting a head start on 3D games, but that was short-lived as the 5th generation of consoles quickly came and dominated both markets.
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aww, hit it! Sega's next-generation gaming platform, revolutionary sports and arcade gameplay, all with amazing new 3D experiences never before possible on home game systems.
Soon after, arcades became a bit of a niche market and were left as small side attractions at shopping malls, movie theaters, and liquor stores everywhere. Metal Slug was alive and thriving in the arcade scene during a time where video games were beginning to experiment with 3D. To give you a point of reference, the 7th game in the series was released the same year as the critically acclaimed film, The Dark Knight.
Dude, your room is a mess.
I know.
What the hell's wrong with you, man? Why you be the Joker, dude?
What made Metal Slug special was it never chased any trends. Instead, it built itself on the foundation of what already worked and perfected it.
Mission complete.
Just like the arcade's dominance came and went, so did my local pizzeria's cabinet of Metal Slug 3. And nothing ever really felt the same after that. I started to cut class, I constantly argued with my parents, I turned to drugs. I would later rediscover the series in 2006 with the release of Metal Slug Anthology, a game that compiled at the time the entire series. Metal Slug has made its mark on video game history, and to this day you can still see its influence in other games. If you couldn't tell already, I'm a huge fan of this series. I carry at least 75 cents on me just in case I run into one of these arcades in the wild. It doesn't happen often, but you'd be surprised. I've played Metal Slug in at least 7 different parking garages. So where does a game like this come from? Despite its 1996 debut, the series' origin can be traced back much earlier than that. It all started with an arcade developer named IREM. You might remember them for their arcade hits like R-Type, Gun Force, and Ninja Baseball Batman.
Ninja Baseball Batman.
Things were going pretty well for the company, until they weren't, and then they laid off 100 employees. Some left to work for Sega, others for Atlas. But what ended up becoming the Metal Slug team found employment at SNK. They established a brand new subsidiary just for them, named Nazca. The team consisted of only 10 ex-IREM employees and was originally tasked with porting SNK games onto home consoles. It wasn't long until the higher-ups trusted the team to make an original IP of their own. It took 2 years to make, on top of the regularly scheduled porting work, but their first 2 games were Neo Turf Masters and Metal Slug. 2 incredibly well-made games, but Metal Slug took off in popularity like no other. It single-handedly revitalized the run and gun genre when games like Contra were doing some weirdo 3D shit. When designing the world of Metal Slug, artists turned to anime, manga, and artists like Hayao Miyazaki for inspiration. The game's military aesthetics, on the other hand, were influenced by films set in Vietnam, like Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket.
You got a war face? Ah! That's a war face! Now let me see your war face! Ah!
2 years before Metal Slug, there was Gun Force 2, an arcade game that shared a lot of the same developers as Metal Slug. This is a well-made game, but visually it doesn't do anything to differentiate itself from the 20 other arcade cabinets in this pizzeria. But I will say this, the game allows you to shoot 2 guns at the same time in any direction, and that's pretty fucking cool. Initially, Metal Slug didn't have any human playable characters. Instead, players would get to control the Metal Slug vehicle. This would explain why some levels feel the way they do, and why the intro only shows off the vehicle. It makes me wonder when in development they made that switch to human characters. I couldn't imagine stages like Mission 3 working because of the tight platforming needed to traverse the icy cliffs. This change made the team scrap the life bar in favor of a one-hit kill system. It's worth noting that IREM developed a vehicle-only submarine shooter called In the Hunt 3 years earlier. Had the Metal Slug team stuck with the original plan, I'm guessing it would have played a lot like a spiritual successor. Metal Slug stages have tons of variety in the environments. One stage can start in a war-torn city, and as you make your way to the end, you find yourself in a forest. The backgrounds are also filled with rich detail. The atmosphere coupled with the animations make this game feel like a fully realized world. There's also a few set pieces in the game that really add to the cinematic feel they were going for. Three years later came Metal Slug 2. I just said that. There's no time to explain why Metal Slug 2 is a great sequel because it throws you right into the action. For 50 cents, I can't complain. Whose baby is this? The sequel adds new characters, weapons, vehicles, and introduces transformations. On Mission 2, if you get killed by a mummy, you'll become a mummy. You can still run, shoot, and jump, but you're severely slowed down by your rotting flesh. The boss at the end deep throats a mile-long Egyptian pillar, and I somehow kill it with bullets? I don't think so.
Mission complete.
Let me get you in on this secret of mine. The boss at the end of Mission 3 has a safe spot you can exploit. You can continually bait the boss to attack you from below and quickly get back to the spot where you can safely unload fire. You didn't hear it from me though. The game's final mission is hard as nails and tests players' fastest reflexes. Such reflexes I do not possess. Later in the level, out of nowhere, we're suddenly fighting aliens. There was no build-up prior to this encounter, they just kinda showed up. It feels like some things were cut out, and luck would have it, a year later came Metal Slug X.
Metal Slug X.
An enhanced version of Metal Slug 2 that improves over so many things. Too many to list? Without question, this is the definitive way to experience Metal Slug 2. From the very start, aliens are foreshadowed in the background and make varied appearances mid-game. The change that I like the most is what they did with the colors. There's something about playing through a desert at night that just hits different. Mission 3 has got to be one of my favorite levels in video game history, because fall is my favorite season and this level beautifully captures that whimsical spirit, minus the killing. That part in the level where you eat too much and gain weight just reminds me of Thanksgiving. 1 year later, the trilogy would be complete with Metal Slug 3. This is by far the most ambitious Metal Slug to date. From start to finish, it's nothing but a jam-packed joyride. Hard as hell too. The first mission establishes the tone immediately. You don't fight against humans at first. Instead, you fight against giant mutated lobsters. This game goes full-on science fiction B-movie, and the series is so much better because of it. By comparison, this game makes the first two seem rather tame in their levels. The down-to-earth tone the first two games shared were great, and worked for their time, but this is the Metal Slug people remember. Perhaps the most forward-thinking decision was adding branching paths and levels. This makes it one of the most replayable in the series. This is my favorite Metal Slug, and if anyone is curious but only wants to try one out, this is my recommendation. The first mission's boss fight is so iconic, and it's followed by one of the sickest additions to the Metal Slug series. The ability to transform into a zombie where you can then use your bloody vomit to wipe out an entire screen of enemies. Even helicopters don't stand a chance against my bodily fluids. The mission's end boss has you killing E.T.'s entire family, and then a penis emerges from the ground and you have to kill that. There's a lot of phallic imagery in this game. Mission's 4 boss can get fucked. The 5th and final mission is the longest one yet and takes you through so many varied environments. The best thing about this first part is if you fly towards the ground, your character will start to run like a cartoon. The final mission in Metal Slug 3 encompasses all of the elements that made the first two games so great and turns it up to 11. At this point, the game does not fuck around with how difficult it gets. More than often, locking the camera and flooding the room with enemies seems to work just fine. What the fuck am I supposed to do here? This game requires every ounce of your attention, and I can't do that right now because my clothes are almost done drying. Did I mention this pizzeria was also a laundromat? There's a very clever callback with the fake final boss, where the layout matches that of the final boss in the second game. Without any dialogue, the game perfectly communicates to the player that this isn't the end, we're just getting started. Nothing quite shows a player more dire urgency than seeing the series' main antagonist stripped to his underwear and strapped to the side of an alien saucer. The character you've been playing as also gets abducted, and you play as another member of the team to rescue them. Just like that, you're launched into space, and it's here where you play through a vertical shooter. I can't help but think this is the team paying homage to games they previously worked on. It really feels like a coming full circle moment, and not just for Metal Slug, but for arcades in general. Just when you think you've seen it all, you're fighting the same UFO you were in the last game, but this time there's two of them. Because fuck you. Once you enter the alien ship, you see the game's visuals at their most creative. Their interior is inspired by the work of Swedish artist H.R. Giger, and I couldn't see it any other way. I won't spoil the final boss, but like the rest of the game, it's fantastic. Just as the action begins to settle down, the game is over. It ends on a very peaceful and optimistic note. Marco is seen symbolically throwing his gun away, and as it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, the credits begin to roll. It felt like not just the end of Metal Slug, but the end of a long chapter in arcade history. Whether the team knew it or not, SNK filed for bankruptcy a year later. This split up the original team at Nazca, and everyone went their separate ways. Two years later, Metal Slug 4 was released, but this time under new management. At first, the new publisher, Mega Enterprise, did not have the resources necessary to produce a brand new Metal Slug installment. So instead, they enlisted the help of a brand new company named Playmore. When SNK went bankrupt in 2001, one of the co-founders created the company, and alongside game developer Noise Factory, they developed Metal Slug 4. So how's the game? On its own, it's pretty fun. It has some neat highlights, but as a follow-up to Metal Slug 3, it doesn't even come close. Metal Slug 4 doesn't bring anything new to the table, besides two new characters, Shark Boy and Lava Girl. Wait, I forgot there is something new they added. You can now dual wield 2 machine guns, but I know what you're thinking. Can you shoot both independently? No. You know what, Gun Force 2 isn't looking so bad right now. There's a lot of reused assets from previous games, and because of that, the game has no identity. It's still a fun game, and I'll admit there's some elements that are reused here that work better than they originally did. At best, Metal Slug 4 is just a fun remix of elements found in the previous 3 games. I guess you could call this Metal Slug XX, but oh wait, that already exists! Metal Slug 5 released that following year and was a more true to form game. This was the same year that Playmore officially rebranded itself into SNK Playmore. It really felt like this game was going to turn the tide for the series. The character select screen remains the most animated one yet. It feels a lot like this game plays. I feel like a member in the audience waiting for the game to start, and when my guy jumps through the screen, the crowd goes crazy. This game got rid of all the bullshit from the 4th game and added the slide dash. The soundtrack slaps. I don't recall any Metal Slug game that has caught my ear's attention more than this game has. I remember thinking to myself as a kid, are those the Metal Slug? The first mission's end boss is underwhelming, especially when you compare it to the second missions. This is a more worthy sequel than Metal Slug 4 was, and the game has high points that rival the series' magnum opus. In this game, we also get to see the enemy transition from using military technology to futuristic machinery. This is a great addition to the series' world building. To celebrate the 10th anniversary in 2006, Metal Slug 3D was released, only in Japan. This game got terrible reviews and isn't available to play outside of the region. I would need to import a Japanese PlayStation 2 just to play this piece of shit. That being said, I hope SNK can one day port this game onto current consoles. Capping off the second trilogy in the series came Metal Slug 6. This was the first entry not developed with SNK Neo Geo MVS technology. For this game, the team worked with Sega's arcade cabinet, the Atomis Wave. This gave them the technical ability to create larger scale boss fights, incorporate 3D assets to environments, and the ability to zoom in and out. This time around, we got 2 new characters from the Ikari Warrior series. Yeah, that one. Ralph and Clark have made playable appearances in other SNK games like The King of Fighters. I like to play as Ralph because he can take a hit and come back like a goddamn champion. Unfortunately for this game, they got rid of the slide dash, but they added this new combo meter that's fun to see go up. It's really incredible what they were able to achieve with this new engine. The water in this game looks fantastic, and so do the boss fights. This time it really feels like an alien invasion when you see aliens interact with NPCs. By all accounts, this is a great Metal Slug game. 2 years later came Metal Slug 7 on the Nintendo DS of all systems. Considering that console saw tons of retro revivals, including Contra, it makes sense why they chose to go with it. For a handheld game, it's pretty impressive, especially when you compare it to the first portable Metal Slug game on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. It's a full-fledged Metal Slug game on the go, and that's all I can really say about it. There's a part that has you piloting a giant machine. That's pretty neat. 1 year after, the game was remixed and re-released under the new title, Metal Slug XX. It was upscaled for the PlayStation 4 and Steam's online market, but that doesn't help the fact that this still feels like a portable Metal Slug game. Making it 4K isn't going to change that. This brings us to the current state of the Metal Slug series. Next year marks the 25th anniversary, and who knows what that'll bring. Maybe they'll make a new entry in the series, or maybe they'll remake the original trilogy, or what if they made a mobile game? Well, at least the arcade business is doing well. Okay, we might not be able to play Metal Slug how it was intended to be experienced, but fortunately, the series is widely available on all platforms. Each installment is great in its own right, and they're easy to pick up and play. Give the player everything you've got, right from the start. This was the philosophy when developing Metal Slug, and that's why this series has had its lasting appeal. They're fun games about war that don't take themselves too seriously. The endings always had some peaceful or optimistic tone about them that made the whole experience feel almost wholesome. At the end of the day, they're all fantastic military shooters that are just that, fun games. They're not trying to retell history and pretend it's not political, but then depict real events incorrectly to make certain governments seem more heroic than they actually were, or in other words, propaganda. Metal Slug is none of that. It's just a fun run-and-gun shooter that holds a special place in my heart. Next time you find a Metal Slug cabinet in the wild, pump a few quarters in and order yourself a pizza. Tell them I sent you there. Use promo code Heavy Machine Gun to get 70% off, but you gotta yell it really loud or otherwise they'll kick you out.